Hey everyone, welcome to this masterclass, which is in association with Muse by Lemesco and Accucolor by Ben Q. And we're doing something a little bit different today, ready for the winter months. And I'm going to show you my world of photography, which is basically photographing really everyday, boring, mundane objects and making them interesting. So I work in the commercial world and we shoot ad campaigns for most household names. And my work is all about turning that bottle of fairy liquid or whatever it may be into an exciting, interesting image, which will hopefully sell products. And it's something you can do as well at home. You don't need all the kit we've got here. We're a little bit elaborately set up today. We've got full-on sets behind me with wooden boards. That is purely because the paint hadn't dried in time, so we couldn't put them away. So you don't need this. A bit of card will do the job. But I'm going to talk you through my setup, the kit I use, and then I'm going to show you two different types of shot that we regularly do for clients that you can do at home as well. So we're going to start off with a kit, which I'm sure you'll all ask about anyway. So we'll get it out of the way. And I'm shooting with a very old camera, which is a Canon 5DS or 5DSR perhaps. I'm not entirely sure. It is attached to some weird mechanism, which is called a cambo actus. And this lets me do all the tilt shift movements and move the camera around in fancy ways. You completely don't need this to do the job. This is just something we have for work. We're firing flash either through a cable or via a wireless trigger. Again, either way is fine. One thing you can do at home, which is a cheap upgrade, is to get a dummy battery and put a proper big video battery onto your camera, which lets you run for ages. But generally speaking, this can be done with any camera. I've got a 90mm lens. Most of my work shot on a 90. If it's not on this 90, then we do it on a 50. They're pretty much the only two lenses we use for work. Coming out of my camera is my Tether Tools cable. We tether everything to the computer, and we'll show you this as we're going through. And on the bottom of my camera is the best thing you can buy, which is a Tether Tools base plate, which I bought with my own hard-earned cash. This stops your PC board and your camera being destroyed when somebody yanks it. And the PC board is a good £500 repair. So this is money well spent. I bought a cheap one at some point off Amazon, and basically whenever you attach the tripod to it, the camera slowly droops. So worth splashing out. Now we come over to the actual tether station, which is hidden behind this camera here. We're going into a BenQ monitor, which is a big 27-inch 4K. It's not calibrated. And we'll get to that in a bit, but it's not calibrated. It's not set up in any specific way. It's just a big monitor, because in here, this is all being lit by LED fluorescent lights, so the colors are all over the shop in here anyway. But it's a big BenQ monitor, and then we go to our carefully calibrated monitors in the office where we edit, and that's where we get the precision work done. But for now, all we're looking at doing is capturing good images, clean files, and then making sure we get a calibration chart so that we know if the colors aren't right here, we've got a good reference sheet to work off later on in the studio. Now, the first one we're going to photograph is something incredibly mundane and average. And it's a tin of sardines. It's not even a fancy tin of sardines. You can get some beautiful sardine tins. And I always think that's cheating a bit, because when you've got a beautifully designed tin, it's kind of easy to make it look good because it already looks good. This does not look good. So we're going to shoot this over here, single light setups for both of these shots we're going to do today, single light setups, and we've just got a softbox. Now my softbox is the world's most elaborate softbox. This is a hazy light, and it's got a 3,200 watt head in it. Kind of overkill, but it's really convenient because it's on wheels, so it's nice for us to roll around. But there's lots of other things you can use in its place, and we're going to go through those as we go along. Now, in order to get an interesting shot from an everyday item, you first of all will have to decide what it is about this item you think you can hero. Now, with this particular uninspiring tin of sardines, it's got to be the color. The only thing going for this tin is the color, because then it's just got nutritional advice and a ring pull, and it's a nice bright pink. Fortunately, we happen to have painted one of these set walls pink yesterday, so we've already got a nice pink wall. But if you imagine this is just an A2 sheet of card, if you're in the UK, get yourselves down Hobbycraft, and you can pick up these bits of card here for £2.50 each. We've then set it up in such a way that the table piece is angling as a corner into the background. And when we see this in the camera later on, you'll see it creates a really 3D set. So over here, we've got a bit of separation just between the two items, but this could be your living room wall, some very carefully taped on pink card, and then a table with some pink card here, a gap in between them, and this allows you to create a really 3D looking set. So this is the starting point. The next thing we need to do is choose where we're going to place our tin. And this is all done to camera. So this is where Capture One really comes into me. And this is why we shoot tethered. So if I just nip over to my machine, I'll pull up Capture One. And we're going to get live view going, which is just over here. So live view works because we've got the tether cable coming out of the USB port and it's going straight into Capture One, and it just lets us communicate between the two different places. You can do similar in Lightroom as well, I believe, but I'm a Capture One fan because it seems to work better for my needs. And already you can see the 3D nature of this set, which really is just 2 bits of paper. There's nothing fancy going on here. There's no like elaborate set building, even though we do have a bit of an elaborate set. It's nothing particularly bad. So I'm going to focus this camera. So we can see exactly where the tin is. Going to do some nice placement with it and just move it around. And this is why I like live view, because my camera is currently over yonder. I'm over here. I can't see what I'm doing, and I've got short arms, so I can't really be reaching around. So we just do a little bit of wriggling around. I get it exactly how I want it to be. And then we've kind of got the composition sorted. Now, I like to work in a bit of a formulaic way. So I choose the item, I choose the subject. We then choose the colors, the background, the set, we compose it. And all the time, I take a single frame, which is pitch black. Because I'm going to light it artificially, I just want to tell my brain almost that there's nothing here. So on the left-hand side, which is the live view on this screen, that pitch black frame is what my camera is currently seeing. There's nothing coming in, there's no light. And I just find it's a good starting point. Even though I know deep down inside, it's obviously going to be blank if we turn the flash off, it helps me just to see it in that way and go, yeah, there really is no light going on. Now, choosing the camera settings is the next thing I go for. So most of my work, I want it to be incredibly sharp and detailed. So we're trying to hero this item here. Having it with a GUI depth of field isn't really going to hero it, it's more going to hide it. So I'm just get the whole thing in focus. We're at f16, 100 ISO, 125th of a second. And what we're going to do now is turn on my big flash and get a quick test shot. So that's my first frame, and despite being a pro for years, I don't meter anything because I can see from here, we've got the picture on the side, it's a tad bright, I turn the light down. We do own light meters, we do sometimes get them out to look a bit fancy, but in the digital age, you look at the picture on the screen and go, bit bright, turn it down a bit. Now I know that's about a stop overexposed, so I'm going to come down to my pack, turn it down a stop. Quickly get a second frame. And there we go. We're getting into a rough area of exposure there. So we've got the light setup coming in from the side. We can see the light just gracing across the actual background here. So it's helping us choose the separation. Now, what a lot of people would have done is light this here, put a light on the background and change the powers between the two. But really, physics is kind of on our side. So I'm just going to use this big light here, angle it in a way that I'm choosing what it's touching, what it's not touching. And that'll give us that control over the two areas. Let's grab another frame here. See, we need a little bit less on the background. And it's all down to personal taste, really. It doesn't have to be specifically one way or the other. It's just trying to work out exactly how you want it to look. So we're going to bring a bit less gradation on the background. So at the moment, left to right is a little bit dark. So we're going to angle the light further to the background. There we go. Let's give that another go. Just to see if we can get this angle just right. It's getting there. And now we just need to go like that. Perfect. So we've got a little bit less darkness in the corner, nice and bright in the foreground, and the tin is looking okay. We need to check for sharpness before we go any further, because I can tell even without my glasses that that's looking a bit squiffy. So we'll zoom in on the live view. And again, this is just a great, easy way to focus because you can see on a nice big screen rather than having to use the viewfinder with my old eyes. Grab another frame, you'll just see this here just pop into sharpness. Perfect. So this is just the starting off point. This is just us getting to a stage where we can say, right, it works as a balanced image. We've got all the elements of color are there. It kind of looks pretty, but it's not done by any means. Single light setup, bizarrely enough, despite having probably 30 lights in here, is what almost all of my commercial work is done with. It's almost always a single light source. It happens to be the trend at the moment, which is good for our bank balances. But we need to make this a little bit more exciting now. So the tin alone looks cool, but we're going to open the tin. Now, I've opened one earlier because I knew that if I tried to do an opening of a tin actually during a live stream, I'd end up with sardines somewhere I don't want them to be. So we've peeled back the lid. I've drained out a lot of the oil because it kind of looked a little bit swimming in it. And we're just going to replace it there, pop it exactly where the previous one was, and just see what it looks like. We may need to add stuff, move stuff, but we'll get to that as we go along. So let's grab another frame just to see what this looks like on the computer. There we go. So we can see already it looks okay, but it's not hero, it's not singing, it's not quite what we're after. And a lot of that is because we're not getting enough light in it. So I'm going to turn this towards my light source instead. So the light's coming in this way into the actual fish. And because you're not all on smell-o-vision at home, I can tell you now it smells particularly sardine-y in here. There we go, that's better. So we're getting a bit more light inside there. I'm just going to zoom in on the screen because I feel that we're still slightly off on focus. Not too bad. We're getting some light in there. And one of the reasons we tether into Capture One as well, so whilst we're doing this, I am forever just moving the sliders around to see what we can get in post. There's a very important end step to this, but for now, this is me going, right, we've got this space here. This looks okay doing this. We can add a bit more here. This is all good. Let's just pour that white point down a bit so we keep the pinks. That's nice. We'll check in here again. Got a nice black point, but also shadow detail at the same time. So we can sort of see as we go along what's working, what's not working. So if we look back on the set again here, this is where we just need to do a bit of polishing. And this is where most of this sort of work really shines. And your friend here, if you're American, it's called a Q-tip, but we just call them cotton wool buds, I believe. And it's just carefully going around all of this, because whenever we're just heroing a mundane item, that item needs to be immaculate. The last thing you want to find is some fish goo around the edge of your tin. And this is what takes up most of the time on food shoots. It's not so much the cooking of the food, the preparing of the food. It's actually styling it in a way that it looks appetizing. Because things that you don't see day to day as an issue, when it's magnified on the side of a billboard, it's not so nice. So bits of dust, bits of grime, there we go. And just general oil in places where it perhaps shouldn't be. Now, a lot of this sort of styling kit, it's pretty like ordinary household stuff. So the most used things are makeup brushes, cotton wool buds, your camera cloth you get for your lens, the sort of lint-free ones, the microfibers, and then a lot of spray canisters. It's nothing particularly outlandish or expensive. You've probably got all of this stuff already at home. Let me just take a shot of that to compare it to the previous one. Let's look back on the screen again. So just looking in here, this is now, and this is before, and you can see the difference already, just that sort of gunk collecting in the corners. Now it's much cleaner. There's still a bit to do in post here, but we're getting there. Now with the shots themselves and the actual angle of the product, if we just look at the set here, it's very important that it's angled both to camera and to light. So having your camera on a tripod or some sort of static setup, and I have literally gaffer taped it to books on a sort of kitchen table before, is very important, because at this stage nothing's moving. We've got the line of the camera set, and then the lights coming in from here at a set angle. So any movements I make to the product will be nice and consistent. Nothing's changing apart from the product. So if I want to get more light into there, I'll turn it this way, so the light's coming from this side. And if I want to hide the inside of it, which we may do looking at it, we'll turn it away from there. So it's simple choices like this which can really help you decide how you're going to frame it and how you're going to hero the product. Now, one bit of kit you might want to buy are these here. These are designed to feed small cockroaches to snakes, or at least that's what the packaging had me believe. And it allows you to like sort of dive into the product, and you can go behind there and just pull it forward a little bit. There we go. And we'll smush that down nicely. Push some of those scales about a bit. There we go. Just got a quick frame of that, so the tin's looking a bit fuller, because we've not added anything to it. A lot of people believe that food photography is about sort of faking it, but all we've done is we've taken the empty space at the back of the tin and pushed it forwards. And this just allows us to give it a bit more of a full sort of look. So I can grab another frame of this. Super, there we go. Okay, so we're getting there. We've got a nice exposure. Got some nice detail, some good sharpness. And what we need to do now, and this is one of the key parts, we need to get a recording of the colors here. So my camera is a 5DSR, and this is 5DSR land. It sees 5DSR colors. On this scene here, there is no neutral gray. The nearest thing to a neutral gray is the fish, and I'm not convinced it's as grey as I think it is. So we use one of these here. This is a color checker passport. And I use these religiously because when I get this back into post in about a week's time, I'm going to have no idea what color pink this was, nor what color pink this was, or what color pink the sardine tin is. And this matters for two reasons, really. One is if this is a client job, the pink of that sardine tin is extremely relevant. It has to be exactly as it is. And the other is when I'm editing it, sometimes you get stuck with colors, you're sat there in the hue, saturation, and luminance sliders, like going slightly insane because you just can't get it to work. So we place one of these in, we take the frame. One is we get a perfect gray balance or white balance from here, which tells us which bit should be gray, and that helps a lot. But the next part of it is it allows us in post to build an ICC profile. So it's telling my camera, this red here needs to be that red, because what Canon records is very different. And also if you had a Canon, a Nikon, a Sony recording slightly different things, it would align them all to produce that same red color. And that's incredibly important, especially if you're doing product work where the brand is paying you. But mostly for your sanity, if you're ever trying to edit colors in Lightroom or Capture One, this just saves a lot of time. So we place this in shot. There we go. I'm going to balance it on my fish because what could possibly go wrong? We're going to grab a frame of that. Beautiful. I'll turn this light off for a moment. And now that we've got our frame over here, if we look on the computer, this frame of this calibration chart is only relevant for this exact setup. So you can take our white balance there, and already you can see that made a huge difference. And later on in post, in the next session, we'll show you exactly how to get those colors to match as accurately as humanly possible for this camera. If we were to change our aperture at this point, or if we were to change the light power, the light modifier, anything to do with the recording of the image, we'd then have to get another calibration shot. So on a production or a big shoot, we'd be doing this now. And if I made a change, it'd be someone's job to remind me to get this in at the end. Because if I've done this now and we go, do you know what, let's go F22, let's change that to a hard light source. This is no longer relevant to that image. So it's very important that you make sure the last frame you do of that set has one of these in them. Now, of course, the kit we've used for this shoot so far is rather pricey stuff. not just pricey, but you can't fit a hazy light in your living room. Or if you do, I should probably take up your career choice in life. But you don't need this particular fancy setup. This whole thing here can be done with 2 sheets of card from Hobbycraft, a speed light, which is one of these nice little battery powered things here, little gizmos, and you can put some of these on. These are by Rogue, and this one here diffuses the light. They have some which snoots the light, which is almost like an optical snoot, but this is like a plastic sort of rubbery one, which one, you can pack it into your pocket, which is nice, but 2, you can use it just to pick out a bit of light, maybe inside the sardine tin. So there's lots of options around this if you do want smaller things. And if you want to create a massive softbox with one of these, you can just get a sheet of tracing paper, get the Rogue kit behind it, shoot it straight through. And this is basically expensive tracing paper for people who have too much time on their hands researching on the internet. So now that we've got this shot predominantly done, very simple as you can see, very attainable at home, the one bit of advice I would give you is the lighting distance. And this is something which most people sort of miss out on or forget to talk about. There's this brilliant law of physics called the inverse square law. And it basically says light vanishes really, really quickly. If your light is 1 meter away from the set and you move it a meter further back, you lose 75% of that light, which is kind of interesting, but kind of boring. So if we have this light a meter away, from this side of the set to this side of the set, we lose 75% of the light, which means it's bright here and dark there. This is where most still life photographers go wrong. You need the distance in order to evenly light the set. So in order to get a really evenly lit set, you probably need to be 5 meters away. So if you're looking at your shots and going, oh gosh, they're like bright at one side clipping, but then the shadows are muddy and dirty, it's the distance of the flash. Move the flash further away. For most of the shots we do, the flash is at least 5 meters away. And for a lot of the really striking hard light images we do, it can be up to like 10, 15 meters away. So distance is key, and it's something I don't think is portrayed enough. So we're shooting this on a table at the moment. If I was shooting this at home, which I have done in the past, we'd move this onto the floor, and we've already gained like 2 foot of distance. So put your set on the floor, and then your light can be in the far corner of your living room, and your set's in the opposite corner on the floor. So there's ways around it. Just because we have all the tools here, these are just to make it more comfortable, easier, a bit more efficient, but it's entirely attainable at home. And what I'm going to show you next is the hero shot. So we're going to move over to the next set along. This is a little bit more complex to do, and I'm going to show you some styling tips as well as how to light this shot. And bear with me whilst I faff around. Super. So I'm just going to wheel my studio stand over. And because I always get a question about this bit of kit, the thing holding my camera is called a salon stand. It's, oh, there we go, flying batteries. This is basically just so we don't have to worry about the camera falling down or toppling over. It's entirely not required unless you're as clumsy as I am. Now, if you ever want to get a hero shot like this, the main thing, or sort of in any hero shot, I guess, is that you're low down. And this is pretty much how we shot a rather big campaign this year. You start off with a low down camera. You don't need a wide lens for that heroic look. It just needs to be low down. And you need to be looking up at the subject. So for this here, a table is definitely of use. There we go. So we've got our can of Schweppes tonic water because it's Christmas and I'll be on the G&Ts very shortly. It's a nice crisp yellow colour, and again, choosing items that are plain and simple really help make this an easier task, I suppose. Anything too ornate, then the product kind of does its own work for you, and it's less the photography, more the product design. There we go. So first up is to get it all angled up nicely. Making sure we don't cause chaos. There we go. Nice high angle. And the plinth itself, we won't actually have in the final shot. We'll crop that. One of the joys of having these high resolution cameras is that you don't need it all. There we go, and that's a composition I'm happy with. Now lighting this one here is slightly more attainable gear. It's a Pixar Pro, which is also Godox. I'm not entirely sure on the naming difference, but it's a Pixar Pro light. It is bare bulb. I'm going to lower it into frame so you can see what that means. But it basically means you don't have to spend any money on modifiers. So this here is just, there we go, just the light, just glass, flash, nothing else. This is a very common setup for me at the moment. And the key to this is, my light is coming down here, slightly to the side of the camera. And that's important because it's going to offer some modeling. It's at a good distance, so the can will be reasonably evenly lit. Let's grab a quick frame of that. There we go, just for a starting point. I'm going to apply a crop to it straight away because I already know that I don't want all of that. We're going to go 4:5 because then it looks like you can afford a phase. There we go. Crop it nice and tight. We'll just see. One of the great things about this Catch One software is we take the next frame, it maintains the crop. Let's quickly check focus on that. And so far what we have is a pretty boring image of a can of Schweppes tonic. Now Schweppes is kind of the tonic or classic tonic brand of the UK. Nowadays there's much fancier tonics around. But this was the tonic which you would have had back in the 80s with ice and a slice, with your gin and tonic, probably a bit of Bombay Sapphire. But this is what you'd have had. So far it's pretty average looking, if I'm honest. There's nothing special going on here. It's a can, it's a background, it's a single light source. And this is normally where, as a photographer, you might start going, well, I'm going to get some more lights out. We'll get a halo light, we'll get a rim light, we'll get a back. We don't need any of that. What we need to be doing here is making the can look good. And I'm going to let you in on a little trade secret. It's called slush powder. Now, you can buy some incredibly expensive, fake, snowy, icy looking stuff from special modeling shops and special styling shops. But this is made with the same stuff. You find it on Amazon. Every now and again, it goes into stock. And every now and again I buy a lot of it. So we're going to start with some of this. We're going to pop it into some water. And we're going to make it snow. And then afterwards I'll probably take it home to the kids. Just mix this up in the glass. We end up with this beautiful like snow frosting there. We don't need this much of it. I've never knowingly made the right amount. It's always like mountains of snow. So we've got that. We've also got this brilliant bit of kit here, which is called K-Line Semi-Matte. And this just dulls the can, which allows us to do a few more special bits. Because what we have on this can is a matte majority with a very annoying, very specular reflective silver bit at the top. So we're going to start this off by slightly fumigating the room with this. And that's just an ever so slight dulling spray. It doesn't make a huge difference, but it does help us a lot in post later on. There we go. So that's where we are now. It's just helping take the edge off up here. And especially in this busy studio, we've got lots of cameras around us. It's just going to reflect all of that. And for me to get enough boards in to stop it, well, you won't see what I'm doing. So we've just got rid of all the reflections because before this was basically a fisheye lens of the room, which is never ideal. We're then going to go with the classic spritz. Now, this is glycerin and water. You can get glycerin from any pharmacy in the UK. Never buy it in small quantities. It's extortionate. Buy it in a 5-litre like vat. And then you want to mix it 50-50 with water. And then you want to get yourself down the shops and buy as many spray misters as possible. And I'm going to be a bit careful with this because once it's on the floor, it's like an ice rink. And we're just going to give this a nice spray there. Let's grab a frame of that from the computer. Super. A few of those are a little bit too big. I'm going to have to get my chair because I can't think and stand at the same time. And we're just going to take some of those away. And to do that, I'm just going to use a paintbrush. Just going to stone here. So there's one on the word Indian and one on the word tonic. I'm just going to brush them down as if they're beads of water. There we go. Let's give that a quick go. And once we've got this in place, the mixture of K-line, that's a bit better. The mixture of K-line and glycerin kind of holds it there for a very long time. So much so that I've often come back to these and found them in the fridge afterwards. And there's a bit of just a horrific beer bottle at the back. I'm just going to take some of these bigger drops off with the cotton warbird now. And again, this is when you're doing these really simple shots, this is what makes the difference. It's all the little attentions to detail. So I'm just removing any ununiformed blobs of glycerin. And the glycerin itself just helps hold it all together. It makes it stay there for longer. If this was actually cold, we'd be having a nightmare of just fluid streaming down. Now we've got those in place, it's time to get some frosting on. And this is where it goes really steady handy. So just going to kind of tip it onto the top. The trick is not to get carried away, which at some point today I will do. There's always the shot where you've gone too far. I'm just going to get a quick frame of that and see where we are. So I'm just looking at my monitor now to see what it's looking like. So this one here is a bit too much, but this is looking quite nice. It's nice crisp shadows. We need to work on the background color still, but we're not too far off here. We're not too far off at all. I'm going to change my clarity to punch because look at that. Doesn't that look better? And I need to get some K-line in on the bottom, so we're still getting quite a lot of reflections in there. So there's a bit more matte spray and a bit of a removal of the ice. How's that? There we go. Let's try that. And then we're going to add a little bit more excitement to the final image with some black card. Super. So this little bit of kit here, this is called a finger. And it doesn't really do a great deal, but it's a bit of black card, really. This is an expensive professional version of it, but if you've got some crafting card, it's often white on one side, black on the other. It does exactly the same thing. What I'm going to try and do here is pull it into shot and just see if we can get a nice dark shadow down the side. So at the moment, we've got a bit of a purple cast on the Schweppes side. So I'm going to bring this nice and close in, get that shot there. And what we should see, perfect, it's that's too much for me, actually. We're going to come a little bit further back. It's always a bit of a fine line. There we go. So now it's time to get a bit of definition down the side of the can. I think the next thing we need to do is perhaps look at the lettering of Schweppes. We've got some ice on there at the moment on the E, and we need to slightly rotate the can. And again, it's all very much precision stuff. When you're photographing like a simple everyday object and trying to make it a hero, there's really not much room for mistakes. It's got to be perfectly aligned, perfectly in focus. Everything has to be just so. Otherwise, it looks really, it's a bit too rough and ready, I think. So it's going to move this bit of ice here. Let's topple down. There we go. This one here. Let's grab a frame of that. So I'm going to put this in place. There we go, that's better. Much more straight on. We've got a blob over the water now though. Let's just drop down. And again, just tethering into capture one. That just allows us to see exactly where these problems are. If you're shooting and looking at the back of the camera screen, it's not as easy, but we've got like a 27-inch BenQ monitor that even with my bad eyesight, I can see from over here, which is super helpful. Okay, now for the added bit of pizzazz, we're going to try and open the can. Now I've chosen this particular can specifically because the can ring pull lines up with the text. If you've never had to open a can ring pull perfectly compared to the text, you won't know the pain of finding the perfect can. They're all over the place because they get wrapped afterwards. So the cans come out and they just roll through a machine. Sometimes the ring pull's facing left, right, back, front. This one happens to be going perfectly parallel across it. So I'm going to try there we go. Just pull this out, grab a frame of that with a ring pull showing. Do we see it? It's not enough, so we need to pull it higher up. And this is where we're going to start. There we go. Start to just show the can in a bit more excitement. We're going to start adding to this shot now. We'll get one more frame just with the black card and the ring pull out so it all marries up. That looks perfect. And now we're going to add a little bit of something else. So these are spiffy. Specular. It says spiffy on the bottom of them. It's a specular spiffy. There we go. This is an LED light. And the specific reason I'm going to use this one, I don't know if you can see this on camera, but these actually have lots and lots of individual LEDs on them. And the hope is, if I move these fast enough, we're going to get a nice blur in the background. We're going to add a bit of pizzazz to it. Now, I'm going to try and do purple on purple, which is obviously not as straightforward to stand out. So what I'm going to do now is change my shutter speed. We're going to start dragging the shutter. Now, the flash is mostly concerned with the exposure on the can, but what we're going to try and do now is let some light into the background and just see if we can get a little bit of movement going on. I've got all the house lights on at the moment, so we may need to, we can see them coming in. We may need to dip the house lights, but we'll see. I'm going to keep dropping the shutter speed until it becomes a problem. There we go. Let's try this and see if we can get away with it without plunging ourselves into darkness. There we go. So this is just light painting. You've probably done light painting at some point before, but this is using it as more of a graphic compositional tool. So rather than just, I think everyone's seen somebody standing with wire wool in a park at some point, spinning it round and going, here's a wire wool picture. This is trying to use it in more of a commercially viable way. This looks like graphic design. The whole shot is based on graphic design. And we're just adding that extra element to it. Now this is, bizarrely enough, working quite well as a diagonal stripe with the house lights still on. And this is very much a trial and error process. So too far that way, you just come a bit this way. Bit too much. We'll get there eventually. We've still got time. We've still got time. We'll get the perfect shot. That's not too bad. Bit too wonky though. Now for me personally, it's all about the graphic lines. There we go. But I've got the bottom of the lighting show, so you can start from lower down. Completely missed it. And this is a good representation of what it's like in the studio with me. There we go. That's what I was looking for. Perfect. So we've got that shot. I'm going to 5-star this now before I forget which one it is in post. Because once we've got a shot, this is usually the point where we start to make bad decisions. And I'm going to try and use this here to do some slightly different things, just to see if there's a better option here. So what if we just sort of shake it? Does that do anything cool? Let's have a look. There we go. Not so much. It's better with the solid movements. That's nice. I think in a darker room it'd be better because you wouldn't actually see the black handle, so I'm sort of trying to hide parts of it. so you can also see what we're shooting at the same time. And all I'm doing, if you look in the camera here, is just moving it around, trying to create some sort of nice swirls, diagonal lines. There's nothing particularly like difficult. It's trial and error, and the problem is you'll get everything almost perfect. You'll try to just one element of it, and that will be the end of your day. It will drive you slowly. There we go, slowly spare. There we go. So we've got a few options. I would like to just try coming up and backwards just to see what we get from there. No, it doesn't work. It was better with the diagonal lines. Yeah, I think we'll stick with that. I'm just going to move back to the frame I preferred from earlier. Quite a fan of the curve, but this one here for me, it's all about these stripes here. Nice graphic image. I'm just going to pull the black point in a bit tighter. There we go. One thing I do want to do, and I do this now, and I always do it in camera as we shoot, even though I know this monitor is not calibrated in any way whatsoever, I always do it now, knowing that we'll properly do it later. I'm just going to play with these saturations a bit. Just pull that, see what we've got there. So we've got plenty of color there. Just jump into the advanced slider and see what we're getting up here. Just going to pull the lightness down. Beautiful, a bit more saturation. So we've got all this room to play. There we go. Now we're getting somewhere. Take the yellow from here. Perfect. Now, with this particular type of shot, we've come in very close. And this is going to sound obvious. If we just get the main camera back on again, I'll show you. We've got our colors. Schweppes yellow is Schweppes yellow. It's a trademarked color, much like Coca-Cola red is Coca-Cola red. So what's important to us is that our camera knows which yellow this yellow here is when we get it in shot. So we get a frame right at the end. We need the frame with the 1 second shutter speed because there's ambient bleed at this point. So I'm going to take that frame there. I'm going to try my best to hold it still. It doesn't have to be sharp though. It's not like a perfectly crisp image. Oh, I need to go up higher. There we go. So although it looks like I've missed most of it off, if we just take the crop away and go to reset. There we go. We've got all of the colors in there we need. Now, normally I'd probably get someone to hold it for me. But I think we're just going to use our lovely Schweppes can there. It's a bit, I thought I could stand a bit more still for 1 second than I actually can, but I've had about 7 coffees today. There we go. That's perfect. So we've got that chart now photographed, and this frame here directly relates to the frame before. If I were to use this color checker shot now on the image where we had the 125th of a second, the calibration would be wrong. So if I want to get a second calibration for those shots, just in case, I'd put my shutter speed back. So we're getting absolutely no ambient blur. We take a second frame, and that frame now will be for the 125th of a second. And if we look at the capture one, you'll notice it's subtle, but you'll notice the camera records these ever so slightly differently. And it's important to have those two options because it's amazing how much difference something like this can make. And if we just look at the color chart from here, a big pro tip I'd give you on this particular set, if you look at the distance from camera here, we can get the whole chart in. Often when we're doing macro work, we can't. So you take the macro shot, pull the camera all the way out, and take a wide angle shot with the same lens. Don't change your wide angle lens, same lens of the actual color checker. So if your shot's this close and you can't get the whole thing in frame, get the shot you need to do, pull the camera out, refocus and shoot again. Because the light is at the same distance, it's the same lens and the same camera settings, you'll still get perfect calibration within that. There we go. How are we looking on time over there?
Good.
Are there any questions?
I think someone was bothered by the smudge on your...
Oh, the smudge on the background.
Yeah.
I did that before the live stream started. So we'll fix it in the next session though in post. It's often easier to clone stamp it out than it is to flip the whole card around.
And someone asked why you were shooting on paper and not vinyl.
So very good question, the paper and vinyl. So vinyl you can obviously wipe down and clean, which is very useful. But it's even matte vinyl, or what claims to be matte vinyl, isn't matte. It's also far more textured than you'd imagine it to be. When you're shooting with like f/16 on a detailed camera, it pulls up a lot of detail and the colors, they're not as good. Whereas when you get paper, the colors just tend to be better. It's more wasteful for sure. Although I'm not really sure on the pros and cons of recycling vinyl compared to paper, but paper just tends to look better, and it's also lighter to store as well, which is always a bonus.
So we've got a question from Martin who's saying, my problem is knowing when to stop adding enhancement to product shots. How do you know when to stop? Or is there always room for improvement? That's
a very good question. So in terms of in the capture point, there is always a moment where you've got it right, and then shortly afterwards you go too far. And it's normally only with hindsight that you see it, because you take the next frame and go, it looked better before. Knowing that mostly comes down to experience, but in post-production, this is where it gets really tricky. The longer you spend in post, you keep making it better and better and better. And what I like to do is revert back to the original raw file, just so I don't lose complete track of what I was trying to achieve in the first place. So having those two next to each other, it kind of helps grind me a little bit, because otherwise there's a lot you can do in post. And like you say, you can just forever try and make it better. And more is not always better.
And there was another question, sorry, I'm reading them from the stream. Do you have a good idea of your lighting setup before you start the shoot, or do you modify it as you go along?
So in terms of lighting setup before shooting, I always know exactly how I'm going to light something, but then we do tend to modify it. For example, I already knew that for the Schweppes can, I was going to light it from above in this particular style, so we've got the nice fall off of light, but I didn't know that I was going to need this here in order to get a bit of extra contrast on the side. It's always like in the back of my mind I might need it, but it's not something I plan in that much detail. The majority of what I plan in advance is how far away the light will be. So if I want an evenly lit scene, the light needs to be miles away. If I want really like sculpting light on the product, it needs to be really close.
And one that's just come in about, if you were shooting glass, how would you cope with the reflection?
Yeah, so glass reflections is a subject that divides the room. A lot of people like to go for a sort of a scrim and some sort of like gradation along the glass. What I like to do is go with hard light, and the key to it is placing the catch light in the optimal place. So rather than worrying about reflections, it's choosing where to place the reflections, because if a glass has no reflection, it doesn't look like a glass, because glasses reflect. So it's choosing to put the reflections in a place where you're happy with them and where it adds to the narrative of the shot.
I mean, we're getting lots of questions now, but we'll probably answer those through the
Sounds good.
I think.
Super. Well, thank you very much, everyone. Thanks for dropping by. It's been a pleasure. Yeah, and I just want to say a massive thank you to Muse by Leicester and AccuColor by BenQ for sponsoring the event and helping us put this together for everyone. I'll see you all soon.